Russia's media, at first silent about the invasion, is now beginning to give insights into operations in Ukraine. Inevitably, their coverage features advances by them and Ukrainian reverses. And indeed, there have been Russian advances. But these have been slowed in many places, revealing an army struggling to make progress.
This seems to be because of the kind of political judgments that were made in advance about what kind of a war this would be and just how easily the Ukrainian state would collapse. But also, in part, it's about specifically military issues, that precisely all the nuts and bolts points, in terms of communication, logistics and the like, seem really not to have been addressed properly. And therefore, we do have a pretty shambolic military operation underway.
Across Ukraine, scenes like this have unfolded. A multi-million-pound Russian anti-aircraft system towed away by farmers. Whether it broke down or ran out of fuel isn't clear, but either way, the crew didn't defend it. These Ukrainian men found a working Russian tank and decided to go for a joyride. The Ukrainian government has even published instructions for how citizens should turn in abandoned vehicles. Those abandoned vehicles really just give a hint of the scale of the Russian army's problems in Ukraine. In many places, their advances have ground to a halt, and it seems as if the pressure of fighting fellow Slavs is causing some of their people to go slow and others to give themselves up as prisoners. We've viewed dozens of Russian prisoner interviews, but disguised the soldiers' identity in order to give a sense of their story.
At first, we were going to exercises for 2 weeks at the Kosminsky training area. After that, we were ordered to the Ukrainian border. They also took away our phone when we were at the Kosminsky training areas, and then we came here. Our fighting vehicle got stuck, so I threw away my weapons and surrendered.
I didn't know what our mission was. I was just part of a convoy, and that's all. We weren't given any specific objectives by our higher commanders.
We were sent to Belgorod, and we started to ask questions like, what for? We were told not to worry and nothing was going to happen. If something was to be done, they would tell us to stay put by the river, so that the Ukrainian army troops would not advance into the Russian Federation.
While attention has focused in recent days on a huge convoy northwest of Kyiv, reports from the ground suggest that Russian troops in that area have barely advanced in the past 48 hours. Instead, particularly in Kharkiv, bombardments have started from an army that now apparently doubts its ability to take Ukrainian cities and therefore seeks to intimidate their people into giving up. That's reportedly what was going on here in Konotop, northwest of the capital. The Russian officer being barracked by locals had entered the town under flag of truce to deliver an ultimatum: surrender or face bombardment. In his raised hands are grenades. Retreating to their vehicles, the Russian soldiers left to a barrage of swearing from local people. Faced with deadlock, there's little other option than escalation.
Given that their current, it seems ridiculous to call it light touch, but let's say lighter touch approach isn't working, it seems very likely that, and we're already beginning to see signs of that in Kharkiv and elsewhere, that instead they're resorting to basically how they're trained to fight, which, particularly when it comes to cities, as you can see from Grozny, from Aleppo, tends, unfortunately, to involve blasting the city apart rather than going in and doing the nasty, gritty work of urban close combat.
The question now is whether the Russian military has the will, means and agility to finish off this campaign. Its radio communications, intercepted and posted online by activists, indicate an organisation struggling to prevail. There are big questions facing Russian commanders in the coming days, not least about whether the large forces deployed around Ukraine, more than 80% of which have already been committed to action, are actually sufficient to gain the upper hand. Fearing the answer is no, they've started calling up reserves. This selection of distinctly mature reservists featured on Russian TV, indicating their willingness to do whatever was required of them.
Вы ополченцы, да? Да. Резервисты?
As the Russians have discovered, entering Ukrainian towns doesn't mean taking them or their hinterland. Convoys, particularly of supply trucks, have proven vulnerable. Faced with the prospect of an intensifying conflict, Moscow is now abuzz with rumours of a general call-up and martial law.